What happens when a humble man is humiliated by a receptionist, unaware that he owns a hotel? Watch as secrets unfold, egos shatter, and a powerful lesson in respect changes everything. You won't believe the twist. Stay tuned till the end. Subscribe now for more shocking stories. Jason Statham, the world-renowned action star, had just stepped out of his sleek black SUV into the chilly evening air. The glow of the streetlights reflected off the smooth surface of the pavement as he quickly pulled his hoodie further down over his head, attempting to remain unnoticed. It wasn't the first time he had tried to hide his identity in public, but it was certainly the first time he'd done so intentionally in a place like this. Dressed casually in a dark jacket and jeans, Jason didn't want the attention of fans or paparazzi as he made his way toward the entrance of the luxury hotel. The hotel's towering facade loomed before him, its grandeur nearly intimidating. This was the last place he wanted to be recognized today. He wanted peace and solitude, away from the cameras and endless questions. As he approached the grand revolving door, Jason glanced around once more, ensuring that no one had picked up on his presence. For once, he wanted to feel like a normal person, a man in search of a quiet, restful night. He wasn't Jason Statham today. He was simply Jason, just another traveler in need of a room. Inside the hotel, the lobby was opulent, with crystal chandeliers that shimmered overhead and classical music softly playing in the background. The marble floors glistened with polished perfection, and the air was thick with the murmur of other guests going about their business. Jason walked past them, unnoticed, feeling both relief and a sense of normalcy. At the reception desk, the young receptionist, whose name tag read Samantha, was preoccupied with her work. Jason took a breath, steeling himself for the simple task ahead, checking into his room without drawing attention. He walked up to the counter, his presence barely making a ripple in the air. Samantha, the receptionist, was focused on her computer screen, flipping through reservation details and responding to a few emails. It had been a long day, filled with the usual bustle of managing check-ins and addressing guest inquiries. The arrival of Jason, in his low-profile attire, barely registered as she glanced up at him momentarily. She noted his average appearance. His jacket was simple, his shoes not polished to a perfect shine, and quickly assumed he was just another guest, no different from the many that passed through the hotel. She didn't recognize him, nor did she look twice. With a quick glance at her monitor, she turned her attention back to the task at hand, unaware of the celebrity standing before her. Jason cleared his throat gently, his voice calm and polite. "Good evening. I have a reservation under the name Jason Green," he said, using an alias as a means of maintaining his privacy. Samantha, still distracted, typed the name into the system without much thought. She noted the booking details and then looked up with an air of professionalism, but without the slightest hint of recognition. "Ah, yes, Mr. Green," she said, clicking through the system. "Everything seems in order. Could I just have your ID, please?" Jason handed over his ID card, keeping his face slightly turned away from the overhead lights, trying to stay as inconspicuous as possible. Samantha gave it a quick glance, her attention already drifting. She handed back the ID and slid the room keycard across the counter, with a smile that barely registered as genuine. "You're in room 207, Mr. Green. I hope you find it comfortable." Jason took the key, nodding in acknowledgement. Her indifference stung a little, but he held his composure, choosing to let it go. "Thank you," he said quietly, turning to head toward the elevators. The lobby continued to hum with life, and Jason walked through the crowd, blending in once again, unnoticed as he headed for his room. Jason's steps were quiet as he made his way toward the elevators, his mind already shifting to thoughts of the quiet evening he hoped to have. The luxury suite awaited him, a temporary haven from the chaos of his fame. However, as he pressed the button for the elevator, he couldn't help but feel an unsettling sense of being watched. The hum of the lobby around him, the soft chatter of guests, and the occasional glance from hotel staff all contributed to a feeling of discomfort he wasn't used to. It wasn't the first time he'd tried to go unnoticed, but something about the interaction with Samantha had felt off. It was almost as if she hadn't quite believed his story. The elevator doors opened and Jason stepped inside, pressing the button for the second floor. The doors closed and he let out a quiet sigh, hoping to finally retreat from the spotlight, even if just for a few hours. Meanwhile, downstairs, Samantha sat at the front desk, glancing back at the reservation details she had processed for Jason Green. There was a flicker of doubt that crept into her mind as she read through the entry again. Something about it didn't sit right with her. She had dealt with hundreds of reservations, but something about this one seemed off. It wasn't the booking itself, but the guest. She hadn't paid much attention at first, but now, with her suspicions rising, she wondered why the guest hadn't seemed particularly excited about his luxury room. The name Jason Green didn't ring any bells, and his lack of ostentatious wealth or flashy behavior made him blend in more than she expected. She continued to glance toward the elevator, her curiosity getting the best of her. Was this man who he claimed to be? The elevator dinged softly, signaling its arrival on the second floor, and Jason stepped out with a sense of relief. The hall was quiet, a few guests passing by, but no one paying him much attention. His room was just ahead and the door was already ajar. As he walked toward it, a feeling of peace settled over him. This was exactly what he needed, an escape. As Jason slid the keycard into the lock, the door clicked open. However, just as he was about to step inside, his phone buzzed. It was a message from his manager, reminding him about the upcoming press tour. He quickly checked the message and turned to close the door behind him. But just as it clicked shut, a voice from the hallway called out, "Excuse me, Mr. Green, could I have a word with you?" Jason turned, slightly startled, and saw Samantha standing there. Her arms crossed. Her tone was firm, almost accusatory. "Is everything all right with your reservation?" she asked, narrowing her eyes slightly. Jason paused, confusion flickering across his face. "Everything's fine," he replied calmly. "Is there a problem?" Samantha hesitated, looking at him with a scrutinizing gaze. "I just need to verify something," she said, her voice a bit more challenging than necessary. "You see, sometimes people book rooms at a price point they don't fully understand. And while your reservation says you're in a premium suite, I just don't see how someone like you could afford it." Jason felt a pang of irritation rise in his chest. Her assumption was not just rude, it was downright insulting. Still, he forced a smile, trying to keep his composure. "I assure you, I'm capable of paying for my room," he said, his voice steady but firm. Samantha's suspicion lingered in the air, thickening with each passing moment. Jason stood there, his calm demeanor a sharp contrast to the growing tension in the hallway. He had hoped for nothing more than a peaceful stay, but now he found himself stuck in a situation he never expected. Samantha took a few steps closer, her gaze shifting to his plain attire once more, and she continued, "I'm not suggesting anything malicious, Mr. Green, but perhaps there's been some sort of mix-up." Her voice now carried a tone of judgment, as if she was doing him a favor by allowing him to stay at all. Jason's eyes narrowed slightly. He wasn't used to being talked down to like this, especially not after years of being in the public eye. But in this moment, he chose not to react with anger or frustration. Instead, he maintained his composure. "I've been traveling for hours," he said, keeping his tone level. "I just want to get some rest. Can we proceed with the check-in?" Samantha wasn't convinced. Her instincts as a receptionist were telling her something wasn't right, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was dealing with someone who didn't quite belong. "I'm afraid I'll need some form of payment verification before I can finalize your check-in," she insisted, her voice growing colder. "Hotel policy, you know." Jason felt his patience thinning, but he held it together. He reached into his wallet and slid out a sleek, platinum credit card, the kind of card that most people would recognize at a glance. He handed it to her without a word. Samantha hesitated, staring at the card as though she expected it to disappear in front of her eyes. She turned it over slowly in her hand, her gaze lingering on the name embossed on the surface. The hesitation was growing. Jason could feel it now, the ripple of discomfort in the air. His mind raced with frustration, but he said nothing, waiting for her to take the next step. Samantha continued to examine the platinum credit card in her hand, as though trying to uncover some hidden flaw. The silence between them grew, thick with the tension of her disbelief. Jason stood still, his expression calm, though his patience was wearing thin. A few guests passed by, casting curious glances in their direction, sensing something was off. Jason could feel the growing attention around him, but he remained composed, unwilling to let this minor issue turn into a spectacle. Samantha's gaze shifted from the card to Jason's face, back to the card, then to the screen in front of her. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as if she were hesitating to complete the process. "I'm sorry, Mr. Green," she said finally, her tone sharp and dismissive, "but I'm going to need to verify this card. You see, we've had issues with fraud in the past. Hotel policy requires all forms of payment to be thoroughly checked." Jason's patience snapped just a little. "I've handed you my card," he replied, trying to keep his tone steady. "I'm sure it's fine." But Samantha was undeterred. "We can't take any chances. The suite you've booked is one of our premium rooms, after all." Her words were louder than necessary, causing a few more heads to turn, and whispers began to ripple through the lobby. Guests who had been quietly chatting now glanced over, intrigued by the unusual interaction. Jason could feel his face warming, not from anger, but from the growing discomfort of being scrutinized like this. Samantha's actions were starting to feel like an interrogation. She placed the card on the counter, keeping her eyes trained on it, as though expecting it to reveal something. "I'm sorry, but I'll need to double-check this," she insisted again, louder now, for the benefit of anyone listening. The murmurs from the other guests escalated. A few were starting to recognize him, but it was too late. The damage had been done. The growing tension in the lobby was palpable. Jason stood silently, his calm demeanor slowly eroding as the awkwardness of the situation escalated. His identity was slowly becoming a subject of public curiosity, and he could feel the whispers intensifying around him. Guests began to glance back and forth between Jason and Samantha, trying to piece together the reason for the odd standoff. The scrutiny was becoming unbearable. Jason had been in the spotlight long enough to recognize the subtle shift when people started to pay attention. What had started as a minor inconvenience was now turning into a public spectacle. His fingers clenched slightly at his sides, but he kept his composure, unwilling to make a scene. Just as he was about to speak up, a voice from the crowd caught his attention. "Wait a second," said a man from the back, his voice a mix of excitement and disbelief. "That's Jason Statham." The words, though whispered, spread like wildfire. A few guests turned their heads sharply and more followed suit, their curiosity piqued by the sudden revelation. Jason's heart sank. He had hoped to remain anonymous, but now it was clear that his cover was blown. Samantha looked up, startled, and then back down at her computer screen, clearly struggling to process the new information. Her hands froze on the keyboard. Jason, still trying to maintain some level of dignity, chose not to acknowledge the growing crowd. He glanced briefly at the man who had recognized him, but he didn't engage. The last thing he wanted now was more attention. But it was too late. As the realization spread through the lobby, the whispers grew louder, and some guests even began to approach the reception desk, eager to confirm their suspicions. Samantha, still processing the situation, seemed completely blindsided. She looked from the now frenzied crowd to Jason, her expression shifting from confusion to unease. Samantha's face flushed with realization, but before she could form an apology or explanation, the hotel's manager, a poised and sharply dressed woman named Olivia, stepped into the lobby. Olivia's gaze immediately swept over the scene. Jason standing at the counter, surrounded by a few curious onlookers, and Samantha fumbling with the reservation details, clearly flustered. The atmosphere in the lobby had shifted. The quiet murmurs were now full-on conversations, with some guests openly discussing who Jason Statham might be. Olivia's professional instincts kicked in, and she moved swiftly towards the front desk, her heels clicking decisively on the marble floor. Her eyes briefly met Samantha's, and a look of quiet concern passed between them. Olivia turned her attention to Jason, offering a polite smile. "Mr. Statham, I apologize for the inconvenience," she said, her voice smooth and professional, but with an undercurrent of urgency. Jason looked at her, his expression still composed but now tinged with a slight frustration. "It's no problem," he replied, trying to remain calm despite the humiliation of the moment. Olivia immediately addressed Samantha, her tone firm but not unkind. "Samantha, a word with you in my office, please," she said before turning back to Jason. "I'm very sorry for what you've experienced. Please allow me to make this right." Olivia gestured toward the back office, indicating that she wished to handle the situation privately. As Olivia led Jason to a quieter part of the hotel, the crowd that had gathered at the front desk slowly began to dissipate. The whispers continued, but now there was a sense of curiosity mixed with an undercurrent of embarrassment. Not just for Samantha, but for everyone who had witnessed the awkward confrontation. Jason walked with Olivia, grateful for the manager's swift intervention, but still uneasy about the entire ordeal. He had hoped for a quiet night, but instead he found himself at the center of a spectacle, one that had already begun to stain his otherwise peaceful stay. In the manager's office, the tension was palpable. Jason sat across from Olivia, who had closed the door behind them to ensure privacy. He could hear the faint hum of the lobby beyond the walls, but for the first time since entering the hotel, he felt a sense of relief. At least the chaos was contained, for now. Olivia stood for a moment, composing herself before turning to Jason. Her professional demeanor had not wavered, but there was a hint of concern in her eyes. "Mr. Statham, I cannot apologize enough for what just happened," she began, her tone sincere but apologetic. "This is far from the level of service we aim to provide at this hotel, and I assure you this will be handled immediately." Jason nodded, though the sting of the situation still lingered. He had expected better, especially at a hotel of this caliber. But then, Olivia's next words took him by surprise. "I should have known," she continued, her gaze softening. "I've seen you in the media often, and the resemblance was there. But I didn't recognize you at first with the hoodie and everything." Jason let out a quiet sigh. "It's not your fault. I was trying to keep a low profile," he explained, his voice calm but firm. Olivia paused, reflecting on the gravity of the situation. "I'm sure you didn't come here to be treated this way," she said. "I've already spoken to Samantha about this, and she'll be addressed accordingly." Jason raised an eyebrow, sensing something more than just an apology in Olivia's tone. "What do you mean addressed?" he asked. Olivia glanced down briefly, her voice lowering. "We take guest relations seriously here, and this behavior goes against everything our hotel stands for. Samantha will be dealt with accordingly." It was clear now, the situation was more than just a misunderstanding. Olivia's swift response was a sign that the hotel held its staff to a high standard, and the error wouldn't go unpunished. Olivia's words hung in the air, and Jason felt a wave of relief wash over him, knowing that the issue was being handled properly. However, a part of him still couldn't shake the frustration from the earlier confrontation. His peaceful night had been shattered, and the whole ordeal felt more like a circus than a simple hotel check-in. Olivia, sensing his unease, continued, "Mr. Statham, we truly value all of our guests here, and your experience today has been nothing short of unacceptable. I'm sure you've dealt with more than your fair share of misunderstandings, but I want you to know that we're going to ensure this never happens again." Jason gave her a small nod, appreciating her professionalism, but he couldn't help but feel a lingering sense of discomfort. "I've spent years building a reputation for myself," he said quietly, his voice edged with weariness. "And I expect a certain level of respect, no matter where I am or who I'm dealing with. It's disheartening when assumptions are made based on appearances." Olivia nodded thoughtfully. "I understand, Mr. Statham, and I will personally see to it that this mistake is addressed, both with Samantha and with the rest of the staff. Every guest here deserves respect, regardless of who they are or how they look." Jason's expression softened slightly. He appreciated Olivia's directness and her efforts to make things right. "Thank you," he said simply, though there was still an air of frustration in his voice. Olivia smiled gently, nodding in acknowledgement. "You're welcome. And if there's anything more we can do to make your stay comfortable, please don't hesitate to let me know. We'll make sure your room is as peaceful and private as you intended." As Jason left the manager's office, he couldn't help but reflect on the lesson this situation had given him. Not just about assumptions and prejudice, but about the importance of respect and the consequences when it's withheld. He hoped this experience would serve as a reminder, not just to Samantha, but to anyone who might cross his path in the future. Never judge a book by its cover, and always treat others with dignity, regardless of who they may seem to be. If this story inspired you, make sure to subscribe for more powerful tales that touch the heart. Your support means everything. May God bless you.